In October 2024, genealogist Dr. Amanda Foster made a discovery that would unravel one of San Francisco's most carefully concealed family secrets. While researching earthquake recovery records at the California Historical Society, she encountered a wedding photograph that would challenge everything experts understood about arranged marriages in early 20th century America and reveal a shocking truth about immigrant family dynamics during the post-earthquake Reconstruction era. The photograph appeared to be a typical formal wedding portrait from 1906, a large family gathering celebrating what seemed to be a joyous occasion. The image showed approximately 15 people arranged in the traditional posed composition of the era, with the bride and groom positioned prominently in the center, surrounded by family members in their finest clothing. The bride, appearing to be in her early 20s, wore an elaborate white silk wedding dress with intricate lacework and pearl buttons, her dark hair arranged in the fashionable Gibson girl style of the period. The groom, a distinguished-looking man who appeared to be in his 40s, stood proudly beside her in a formal black suit with white boutonniere. Their families surrounded them in carefully arranged tiers, with elderly relatives seated in ornate chairs and younger family members standing behind them. The photograph bore the embossed studio mark of Benedetti and Sons Photography, San Francisco, along the bottom edge, indicating it had been taken by one of the city's premier portrait studios. For 1906, the image quality was remarkable, showing every detail with exceptional clarity, from the delicate beadwork on the bride's dress to the elaborate floral arrangements that decorated the studio setting. Dr. Foster, who specialized in researching immigrant family histories in early 20th century California, had been commissioned to trace the genealogy of the Rossini family, prominent Italian-American merchants who had rebuilt their business empire after the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake. The wedding photograph had been discovered among documents donated to the Historical Society by the family's descendants, who had little knowledge of their ancestors' early history in America. What initially caught Dr. Foster's attention was the photograph's exceptional preservation. Despite its age and the fact that it had survived the earthquake and subsequent fires that had destroyed much of San Francisco's photographic record from that period, the image had been carefully stored in a protective leather portfolio, suggesting the family had valued it highly and taken special care to preserve it through decades of social and economic change. The wedding appeared to represent the kind of successful immigrant family integration that characterized many Italian-American communities in early 20th century San Francisco. The clothing, setting, and formal composition suggested prosperity and social respectability, exactly what newly established immigrant families sought to demonstrate during this period of rapid assimilation and economic opportunity. What Dr. Foster couldn't have anticipated was that this seemingly ordinary wedding photograph contained evidence of a dark truth about forced marriage, family violence, and the systematic oppression of women within immigrant communities, truth that had been hidden behind carefully maintained facades of traditional family respectability for over a century. In her laboratory at UC Berkeley, Dr. Foster began her standard examination process, using advanced digital scanning equipment specifically designed for historical document preservation. The wedding photograph, measuring 10 by 14 inches, showed remarkable preservation for its age, with none of the typical deterioration expected from early 1900s photography, no fading, no chemical staining, and minimal physical damage, despite having survived the 1906 earthquake. The technical quality of the original photograph was exceptional for the period. Benedetti and Sons had clearly used professional-grade equipment with multiple lighting sources to achieve the even illumination throughout the large group composition. The depth of field was carefully controlled to ensure every family member remained in sharp focus, demonstrating the skilled work of an experienced portrait photographer serving San Francisco's affluent communities. As Dr. Foster positioned the photograph under her high-resolution scanner, she noted several details that marked this as the work of a premier studio. The composition was meticulously balanced, the posing natural, despite the formal constraints of the era, and the setting suggested considerable expense had been invested in creating the perfect wedding portrait for a family eager to demonstrate their successful integration into American society. The digital scan revealed extraordinary detail throughout the image. The intricate embroidery on family members' clothing, the texture of the men's wool suits, and even the grain of the wooden furniture used in the studio setting emerged with startling clarity. The scanner captured subtle variations in lighting and shadow that gave the portrait an almost three-dimensional quality, far superior to typical commercial wedding photography from 1906. Dr. Foster began her systematic examination at 200% magnification, checking for signs of retouching or manipulation that were common in professional portrait photography of the era. At this level, the photograph maintained its exceptional quality, with no visible evidence of artificial enhancement or correction work. At 400% magnification, she could examine individual family members in detail, The elderly patriarchs and matriarchs displayed the dignified bearing typical of first-generation immigrants who had achieved prosperity in America. The younger generation showed the confident posture of people who had successfully adapted to American social customs while maintaining their cultural identity. It was at 600% magnification, when Dr. Foster focused specifically on the bride's face, that she first noticed something unusual about her expression. While her pose and formal smile were appropriate for a wedding portrait, there was something in her eyes that seemed inconsistent with the joyful occasion being celebrated. At 800% magnification, concentrated on the bride's face, Dr. Foster saw something that made her lean closer to her computer screen. The bride's eyes, which had appeared appropriately demure in the full portrait, revealed an intensity under extreme magnification that was startling. Rather than the soft happiness expected of a new bride, her gaze displayed a piercing quality that seemed to burn through the camera lens with unmistakable determination and barely contained emotion. This discovery prompted Dr. Foster to research the specific circumstances of this wedding and the families involved, beginning with San Francisco city records and immigrant community archives from the post-earthquake Reconstruction period. Dr. Foster's research into the Rossini family history began with San Francisco city records from the earthquake recovery period. The 1906 earthquake and subsequent fires had destroyed much of the city's documentation, but immigrant families often maintained their own detailed records, and the Italian-American community had been particularly diligent about preserving family histories during the Reconstruction era. Giuseppe Rossini, the family patriarch, had arrived in San Francisco in 1885 with his wife Maria and their 2 young sons. He had established a small import business specializing in Italian foodstuffs and wines, serving the growing Italian-American community in North Beach. By 1906, the business had expanded significantly, with Rossini owning 3 stores and a small warehouse near the waterfront. The earthquake had destroyed Rossini's warehouse and 2 of his stores, but the family had moved quickly to rebuild during the Reconstruction boom. City records showed that Giuseppe had secured substantial loans and had reopened his business within 6 months of the disaster, positioning the family to benefit from the economic opportunities created by the city's rapid rebuilding. However, as Dr. Foster examined immigration and marriage records, she discovered that the bride in the wedding photograph was not a member of the Rossini family by birth. Elena Marchetti had arrived in San Francisco from Sicily in late 1905, sponsored by distant relatives who had arranged for her passage and placement with an Italian-American family as a domestic. Worker.immigration records showed that Elena had been 18 years old when she arrived, traveling alone and carrying only a small trunk of personal belongings. Her sponsors had been the Benedetti family, the same family that operated the photography studio where the wedding portrait had been taken, suggesting connections within San Francisco's Italian-American business community that went beyond simple commercial relationships. Marriage. Records from San Francisco City Hall showed that Elena Marchetti had married Antonio Rossini, Giuseppe's eldest son, on November 15, 1906. Antonio was 23 years older than Elena, making him 41 at the time of their wedding. The marriage license had been witnessed by Giuseppe Rossini and Salvatore Benedetti, indicating the formal involvement of both families in arranging the union. Contemporary newspaper accounts and Italian-American community publications described the wedding as a significant social event, representing the successful integration of 2 prosperous immigrant families. However, Dr. Foster noticed that the descriptions focused entirely on the business and social advantages of the union, with no mention of romantic courtship or personal relationship between the bride and groom. More significantly, Dr. Foster discovered that Elena had been working as a domestic servant in the Rossini household for nearly a year before the wedding, suggesting that the marriage arrangement had been planned well in advance of the actual ceremony. Payment records preserved in Giuseppe Rossini's business files showed regular wages paid to E. Marchetti, domestic services, from January through October 1906. These discoveries indicated that the wedding photograph documented not a love match between 2 young Italian Americans, but rather a business arrangement between immigrant families that involved a young woman who had been brought to America specifically to serve as a bride in a financially and socially advantageous marriage alliance. Dr. Foster's investigation revealed that Elena Marchetti's marriage to Antonio Rossini was part of a systematic practice within San Francisco's Italian-American community known as arranged placement marriages. These arrangements involved bringing young women from Sicily and southern Italy to America specifically to marry into established immigrant families, strengthening business relationships and consolidating economic power within the community. Research at the Italian-American Museum of San Francisco provided crucial context for understanding these practices. Dr. Carlo Benedetti, a historian specializing in early Italian-American immigration, explained that such arrangements were common during the post-earthquake Reconstruction period when established. Families sought to strengthen their positions through strategic marriage alliances. Young women like Elena were often Recruited through family networks in Sicily, Dr. Benedetti explained, they were promised opportunities for prosperity and security in America, but frequently found themselves in marriages that were essentially business, transactions designed to benefit the families involved rather than the individuals. Immigration. Records revealed that Elena had been recruited through the Benedetti family's connections in Palermo, Sicily. Correspondence preserved in the Benedetti family archives, discovered during Dr. Foster's research, showed that the arrangement had been negotiated months before Elena's departure from Italy. In a letter dated August 1905, Salvatore Benedetti wrote to his cousin in Palermo, Giuseppe Rossini requires a suitable wife for his son Antonio. The young woman should be between 18 and 20 years of age, of good character, and willing to adapt to American customs. Financial arrangements have been agreed upon, including passage to America and appropriate dowry considerations. The response from Palermo, dated September 1905, confirmed Elena's selection. Elena Marchetti has been chosen for the Rossini placement. She's 19 years of age, orphaned but well regarded in the community, and eager for the opportunity to establish herself in America. She understands the nature of the arrangement and has agreed to the terms as outlined. These letters revealed that Elena had been fully aware that she was being brought to America for an arranged marriage, not as a domestic worker seeking independent employment. The year she spent working in the Rossini household had been a probationary period during which both families evaluated whether the arrangement would be suitable for their purposes. However, additional correspondence suggested that Elena had not been a passive participant in these arrangements. Letters written by Maria Rossini, Giuseppe's wife, to relatives in Italy described Elena as strong-willed and intelligent, perhaps more so than is entirely comfortable for a traditional household arrangement. In one particularly revealing letter, dated July 1906, Maria wrote, Elena has adapted well to American customs, but she maintains an independence of spirit that sometimes concerns us. She reads extensively, asks many questions about business matters that are not typically the concern of young women, and has expressed opinions about social and political issues that suggest she may not be as compliant as we initially hoped. These descriptions aligned perfectly with the piercing intensity Dr. Foster had observed in Elena's eyes in the wedding photograph, rather than the submissive young bride expected in such arrangements. Elena appeared to have been a strong-willed woman who understood her circumstances, but was determined to assert her own agency within the constraints imposed upon her. Dr. Foster's research revealed that Elena's marriage to Antonio Rossini was part of a larger network of business alliances within San Francisco's Italian-American community. The post-earthquake reconstruction had created enormous opportunities for immigrant families who could pool resources and coordinate their economic activities, leading to systematic arrangements designed to strengthen these business relationships through marriage, financial, records from the Rossini family. Business showed that Giuseppe had entered into several partnership agreements during 1906, including joint ventures with the Benedetti family that went far beyond their photography studio operations. The Benedettis had invested in Rossini's import business, while Giuseppe had provided capital for expanding their photography and commercial printing operations. These business relationships were reinforced through a network of marriages between the families, children and carefully selected young people brought from Italy specifically for this purpose. Elena's marriage to Antonio was one of at least 4 such arrangements coordinated between San Francisco, Italian-American families during the post-earthquake period. Dr. Foster discovered that Salvatore Benedetti's daughter had married one of Giuseppe Rossini's nephews in 1907, while Antonio Rossini's sister had been married to a young man brought from Sicily to work in the Benedetti printing business. Each marriage had been accompanied by substantial financial arrangements that strengthened the business partnerships between families. However, the arrangements were not simply financial transactions. Research at the San Francisco Public Library's archives revealed that these families were attempting to create a self-sufficient economic and social network that would allow them to compete effectively with established American business interests while maintaining their cultural identity. Contemporary business records showed that the coordinated family alliances had been remarkably successful. By 1910, the Rossini-Benedetti partnership controlled a significant portion of San Francisco's Italian food import trade, operated the largest Italian-language printing business on the West Coast, and had established real estate investments throughout the reconstructed downtown area. The success of these business arrangements depended partly on the compliance of the young women who were brought from Italy to participate in marriage alliances. However, correspondence between the families suggested that Elena Marchetti had not proven to be as cooperative as expected in fulfilling her role within this system. In a letter dated February 1907, just 3 months after the wedding, Giuseppe Rossini wrote to Salvatore Benedetti, Elena continues to present challenges that we had not anticipated. She has requested access to business records, expressed interest in understanding our financial arrangements, and suggested modifications to household management that extend beyond appropriate feminine concerns. Antonio finds her difficult to manage despite his efforts to establish proper authority in their relationship. Benedetti's response revealed growing concerns about Elena's behavior. We selected Elena partly because of her intelligence, believing it would help her adapt to American customs. However, her strong will may have been underestimated. She appears determined to exercise influence beyond what is suitable for her position within the family structure. These letters suggested that Elena had not accepted the passive role expected of her in the marriage arrangement, but was instead attempting to assert authority and influence within the business relationships that her marriage was designed to support. As Dr. Foster delved deeper into family correspondence and business records, she uncovered evidence that Elena Marchetti Rossini had not simply accepted her role as a compliant wife in an arranged marriage, but had systematically worked to gain influence and power within the family business network that her marriage was supposed to serve. Financial records from the Rossini import. Business showed that Elena had begun involving herself in operations almost immediately after the wedding. By early 1907, she was signing invoices, corresponding with suppliers, and making financial decisions that traditionally would have been handled exclusively by the male family members. More significantly, Elena had learned to read and write English with remarkable speed, and had begun maintaining independent records of business transactions. Her personal papers, preserved in a trunk discovered during the 1980s renovation of the family home, included detailed financial analyses, supplier evaluations, and strategic planning, documents that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of commercial operations. Business diary kept by Elena during 1907 and 1908 revealed her growing frustration with the limitations placed on her involvement in family affairs. In an entry dated May 15, 1907, she wrote, "Giuseppe and Antonio continue to treat me as if I were a child who cannot understand business matters, but I have learned more about their operations in 6 months than Antonio has absorbed in 20 years of working with his father. They imported me to strengthen their family position, but they refused to recognize that my intelligence could strengthen their business position as well." Elena's diary entries revealed that she had been systematically studying American business practices, reading trade publications, and developing her own ideas about how to expand and improve the family operations. However, her suggestions were consistently dismissed by Giuseppe and Antonio, who viewed her intellectual curiosity as inappropriate for a woman's role within the family structure. The tension had escalated when Elena discovered financial irregularities in the family's import records. Her diary entry from September 1907 described finding evidence that Giuseppe had been systematically understating the value of imported goods to avoid customs duties, while simultaneously overcharging customers for these same goods. Giuseppe's customs arrangements are not simply shrewd business practice, Elena wrote. He is engaging in systematic fraud that could destroy the family's reputation in business if discovered by authorities. When I attempted to discuss this with Antonio, he told me that such matters were not my concern and that I should focus on household management rather than business. Operations that I could not understand, Elena's response had been to begin maintaining her own records of these irregularities, apparently planning to use her documentation to force changes in business practices or to protect herself if the fraudulent activities were discovered. Her meticulous record-keeping revealed the same piercing intelligence and determination that Dr. Foster had observed in her wedding photograph. By 1908, the conflict between Elena and the male family members had become severe enough to threaten the stability of both the marriage and the business relationships it was designed to support. Letters between Giuseppe Rossini and Salvatore Benedetti discussed the possibility of dissolving Elena's marriage to Antonio and arranging for her return to Italy. Despite the substantial financial investments involved in the original arrangement, Dr. Foster's investigation revealed that Elena's resistance to her assigned role had created significant tension not just within the Rossini family, but throughout San Francisco's Italian-American business community. The arranged marriage system depended on the cooperation of young women who were expected to accept subordinate positions within family hierarchies, and Elena's assertiveness threatened to undermine the entire network of strategic alliances. Contemporary letters between Italian-American family leaders showed growing concern about Elena's influence on other young women within the community. Maria Benedetti, Salvatore's wife, wrote to her sister in Los Angeles, "Elena Rossini has become a source of disruption among the younger wives. She encourages them to question business arrangements, to request access to financial information, and to involve themselves in matters that should remain under masculine authority. Her example is creating problems in several families. The Italian-American Women's Auxiliary, a social organization that was supposed to reinforce traditional gender roles within immigrant families, had attempted to counsel Elena about appropriate behavior for married women. However, meeting minutes preserved in the organization's archives showed that these efforts had been unsuccessful. According to the minutes from a meeting in March 1908, Mrs. Antonio Rossini was invited to address concerns about her involvement in business matters that exceed appropriate feminine interests. However, she defended her actions by citing American customs and legal rights that she claimed gave her authority to participate in family financial decisions. Her arguments were persuasive enough to create doubt among some auxiliary members about our traditional guidance regarding women's roles. Elena's influence had been particularly problematic because of her rapid mastery of English and American legal concepts. She had apparently studied California marriage and property laws extensively, discovering that married women had legal rights that were not being recognized within Italian-American family structures. A letter from the community's unofficial leader, Don Carlo Benedetti, Salvatore's brother, to Giuseppe Rossini revealed the seriousness of the situation. Elena's behavior has attracted attention from American legal authorities and social reform organizations. If she continues to challenge traditional family arrangements, she could bring unwanted scrutiny to business practices throughout our community. The arrangements that have allowed our families to prosper depend on maintaining internal discipline and avoiding external interference. The letter continued with a warning about the broader implications. Other families are beginning to question whether importing young women for marriage arrangements is sustainable if those women refuse to accept their assigned roles. Elena's resistance could undermine the entire system of strategic alliances that has been so beneficial to our community's economic development. Church records from St. Peter and Paul's Catholic Church, which served San Francisco's Italian-American community, showed that Elena had also sought support from religious authorities. However, the parish priest, Father Giuseppe Martinelli, had sided with the traditional family structure, counseling Elena to accept her husband's authority and focus on domestic responsibilities rather than business concerns. Elena's response, recorded in a letter she wrote to her cousin in Sicily, revealed her growing isolation. The entire community has united against me because I refuse to pretend that I am stupid and helpless. They imported me because they needed my intelligence to improve their family position. But now they want to pretend that intelligence does not exist. I will not surrender my mind to please people who benefit from my abilities while denying that I possess them. By late 1908, the conflict between Elena and the Rossini family had reached a crisis point that threatened not only her marriage, but the entire network of businesses, relationships built around strategic family alliances. Dr. Foster's research revealed that Elena had taken increasingly bold steps to assert her authority, culminating in actions that would forever change her relationship with San Francisco's Italian-American community. Elena's personal diary entries from this period showed her growing determination to force recognition of her capabilities and rights within the family structure. In an entry dated October 15, 1908, she wrote, "I have spent 3 years demonstrating my value to this family's business operations, only to be treated as if I were a decorative object rather than an intelligent partner. If they will not voluntarily acknowledge my contributions, I will find ways to make my importance impossible to ignore." The breaking point came when Elena discovered that Giuseppe Rossini was planning to expand the family's import operations into potentially illegal activities. Her diary revealed that he had been approached by criminal organizations seeking to use legitimate import businesses to smuggle goods and people from Italy to San Francisco, taking advantage of the confusion and reduced oversight that persisted during the post-earthquake reconstruction period. Rather than remain silent about these plans, Elena had compiled detailed documentation of the proposed criminal activities and had threatened to expose them unless Giuseppe agreed to give her formal authority within the family business operations. Her diary entry from November 1908 described the confrontation. "I told Giuseppe that I would not allow my marriage to be used to legitimize criminal activities that could destroy the family's reputation and future prospects. He could either recognize my right to participate in business decisions or face the consequences of having his illegal schemes exposed to American authorities." Giuseppe's response had been to attempt to have Elena committed to a psychiatric institution, claiming that her challenges to masculine authority indicated mental instability requiring medical treatment. However, Elena had anticipated this possibility and had prepared counter-strategies based on her understanding of American legal protections for married women. Court records from Senao. Francisco Superior Court showed that Elena had filed formal legal challenges to any attempt to commit her involuntarily, citing California laws that required substantial evidence of mental incompetence before married women could be institutionalized against their will. Her legal filings demonstrated sophisticated understanding of American jurisprudence and constitutional protections that most immigrant families had not yet mastered. More dramatically, Elena had also filed preliminary paperwork for legal separation from Antonio, claiming that the arranged nature of their marriage constituted fraud and that she had been brought to America under false pretenses. Her legal arguments challenged the entire system of arranged marriages within immigrant communities, threatening to expose practices that families preferred to keep private. The community's response had been swift and severe. Elena found herself completely ostracized from Italian-American social circles, with families that had previously welcomed her now treating her as a dangerous threat to community stability. Business relationships that depended on social harmony were disrupted, and the carefully constructed network of marriage alliances began to show signs of strain. However, Elena's actions had also attracted support from unexpected sources. American women's rights organizations, progressive social reformers, and legal advocacy groups had begun to take interest in her situation as an example of immigrant women challenging traditional patriarchal structures that conflicted with American legal principles regarding individual rights and gender equality. Elena's defiance of traditional family authority created consequences that extended far beyond her individual situation, ultimately forcing changes throughout San Francisco's Italian-American community and influencing how immigrant families approached marriage arrangements and gender roles in subsequent generations. The legal challenges Elena had initiated attracted significant attention from American legal authorities, who had previously shown little interest in internal affairs within immigrant communities. Court records showed that her separation proceedings had prompted broader investigations into arranged marriage practices, immigration fraud, and the business activities of Italian-American families involved in strategic alliance networks, federal immigration. Officials had begun questioning whether young women brought to America for arranged marriages were being trafficked in violation of international agreements and federal laws. Elena's detailed testimony about recruitment practices, financial arrangements, and coercive tactics provided evidence that several prominent families had engaged in systematic violations of immigration regulations. The business consequences were equally significant. Giuseppe Rossini's import operations came under scrutiny from customs officials who investigated Elena's allegations about fraudulent import declarations and customs duty evasion. While criminal charges were ultimately not filed, the investigation severely damaged the family's reputation and business relationships. More broadly, Elena's resistance had inspired other young women within the Italian-American community to question their own circumstances and assert greater authority within family structures. Marriage records from the period showed a significant decline in arranged marriage practices as families recognized that importing strong-willed young women from Italy could create more problems than benefits. Dr. Foster discovered that Elena's impact had extended to the second generation of Italian-American families who had been forced to adapt to their expectations about gender roles and family authority in response to American legal and social pressure. Community leaders had gradually abandoned the most restrictive aspects of traditional family structures in favor of arrangements that provided women with greater formal recognition and authority. However, Elena had paid a personal price for her resistance. Community ostracism had isolated her from the social support systems that typically sustained immigrant families, and her marriage to Antonio had never recovered from the conflicts over business, authority and legal challenges to family arrangements. Census records from 1910 showed that Elena and Antonio were still married, but living separately within the family compound, maintaining the appearance of traditional family structure while acknowledging the reality that their relationship had been fundamentally altered by Elena's refusal to accept subordinate status. Elena's diary entries from this period revealed the emotional cost of her defiance. I have won the right to participate in business decisions and to be treated as an intelligent adult rather than a decorative child. However, I have lost the possibility of genuine companionship within marriage and acceptance within the community that I hoped would become my home in America. Despite these personal costs, Elena had continued to build her influence within business operations. By 1910, she had become the de facto manager of several aspects of the family's import business, and her strategic insights had helped expand operations significantly. Her success had gradually forced even Giuseppe to acknowledge her contributions, though he continued to resist giving her formal recognition or public credit for her achievements. In her final analysis, Dr. Foster understood that the wedding photograph of Elena Marchetti and Antonio Rossini represented far more than a typical arranged marriage ceremony from the early 1900s. It was documentation of a pivotal moment in the history of Italian-American immigration, capturing the image of a young woman whose fierce intelligence and determination would challenge and ultimately transform traditional family structures. Within immigrant communities, the piercing intensity visible in Elena's eyes under magnification revealed the true nature of her character. Not the submissive bride expected in arranged marriage systems, but a formidable intellect who recognized the limitations being imposed upon her and was already planning to resist them. The photograph had captured the exact moment when Elena was publicly accepting her assigned role while privately preparing to reshape it according to her own vision of her capabilities and rights. Elena's story demonstrated how individual resistance could create broader social change within immigrant communities. Her refusal to accept subordinate status had forced Italian-American families to confront the conflicts between traditional gender roles and American legal and social expectations, ultimately leading to more equitable family structures that better reflected the capabilities and rights of women. The technical excellence of the Benedetti and Sons photograph, with its ability to capture subtle details invisible to contemporary observers, had preserved evidence of Elena's determination that would otherwise have been lost to history. The advanced photographic techniques had documented not just a formal wedding ceremony, but the psychological strength and intellectual intensity that would enable Elena to challenge and transform the very system that had brought her to America. Elena's legacy had extended through subsequent generations of Italian-American families who had been influenced by her example to create more flexible and equitable family structures. Her resistance had contributed to the broader integration of immigrant communities into American society by demonstrating that traditional practices could be adapted to reflect American values regarding individual rights and gender equality. Dr. Foster's research revealed that Elena had continued to expand her influence within the family business throughout her life, eventually becoming one of San Francisco's most successful female entrepreneurs, despite the obstacles created by her arranged marriage origins. By the 1920s, she had gained formal recognition as a business partner and had established several independent ventures that made her financially secure and socially respected. The wedding photograph now served as evidence of a remarkable transformation from a young woman imported as a passive participant in family business, arrangements to an influential entrepreneur who had forced an entire community to recognize and accommodate female intelligence and ambition. Elena's piercing gaze had proved prophetic, revealing the determination that would enable her to reshape not only her own circumstances, but the social structures that had initially constrained her. Her story ensured that the experiences of immigrant women who challenged traditional gender roles would not be forgotten, and that their contributions to American social progress would receive the recognition they deserved. The photograph remained as testimony to the power of individual resistance to create lasting social change, even within seemingly rigid traditional structures.